Hi, I'm Michael, and welcome to Beyond the Screenplay. Today we are talking about the Star Wars Prequel Trilogy, which of course includes The Phantom Menace, released in 1999, written and directed by George Lucas, Attack of the Clones, released in 2002, screenplay by George Lucas and Jonathan Hales, directed by George Lucas, and Revenge of the Sith, released in 2005, written and directed by George Lucas. I'm joined by the Lessons from the Screenplay team, writer Trisha Aran.
Hello, everybody.
Writer Brian Bittner.
Hello.
And editor Alex Calleros.
Hi.
So the Star Wars prequels are things that people have talked about a lot. And so I think what I want to try to do with this episode is to not simply have it be an hour-long beating up the prequels session, kind of like what we tried to do with the Game of Thrones episode. I feel like aim for constructive analysis as much as possible and then see what happens.
We still got to have some catharsis, but also construction.
One of the things I do want to talk about also, because I think this is important, is what age we were when the prequels came out. And so I was 13 when The Phantom Menace came out. And then, so what is that then? 15 for Attack of the Clones and 18 for Revenge of the Sith. And that's pretty much you also,
Yeah, because you're born in 86, right?
Yeah,
me too. So basically the same age and very formative years they are.
Indeed.
Yes.
Indeed. And Alex, you're...
I'm a year younger than you guys, so basically the same age.
Okay.
Brian?
Well, gather around, kids. Phantom Menace. Yeah, we talk about this sometimes where us being 37 and 33 is like whatever, but there are those moments where when you're just even 2 years off from somebody where it's like, oh, that thing that everybody who was 14 at the time was doing, people who were 12 didn't care about or whatever. So for me, I was 17 when The Phantom Menace came out. And so I was like just entering into like my most cynical years.
Sure.
2002 and 2005, I was, I guess, 20 and 23. So in college and like learning about film and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And just, you know, I still appreciated the prequels for what they were, but it was definitely going to the theater with just a total cringe face on, just going, okay, you did that, but all right, here's the next thing. And I'll tell my episode 2 experience a little later on, but yeah, it was definitely a different age than if I had been just entering into my teen years when episode 1 came out, as sort of like, okay, I'm still kind of enough of a kid now to go on this ride. I was like leaving childhood behind.
Well, and this is my question for those of us then that were younger. Did you guys hate these movies immediately?
No.
I don't know that I would even say that I hate them now.
Okay.
Well, the only one that I really didn't like on first viewing was episode 3.
Okay.
And that was when I was
A little older.
near the end of high school, I think.
Right.
I was about to graduate, I think. So at that point, I was more cynical. I was more well-versed in like cinema.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a harsher lens on that movie.
See, because I basically feel the same way. And I did not hate these movies at all when they first came out and kind of thought they were fun, as a matter of fact. Because the thing about 13-year-olds is they're not that discerning.
I loved episode 1. I was
Yeah.
down with it. I had the episode 1 computer game. I had all the things episode 1.
Yeah. I mean, just in a 13-year-old brain, like lightsabers and Jedi jumping around and like that kind of covers a multitude of sins, to be honest. And Darth Maul is just so cool.
Yeah.
So.
Darth Maul is so cool. I had this like very specific frustrating experience with episode 1 where the ending was spoiled for me. Like I feel like it was my first encounter with
Well, the soundtrack
spoiler.
had a track that said Qui-Gon's Noble End.
Oh.
The soundtrack was released before the film.
Right.
I bought it.
Yikes.
And I saw Qui-Gon's Noble End. It was very, yeah.
And they released like an audio storybook version of the movie before the movie came out that includes Qui-Gon dying at the end.
This is before like spoilers. Like people didn't think about spoilers.
And because literally in my like 8th grade class, it was like, Star Wars is coming out this week. Let's do something fun. Let's listen to the audiobook of the upcoming movie. And so I couldn't leave class. They were playing it in class and it just spoiled
the entire movie.
That's really weird. It was also before Liam Neeson as the mentor character died in every other movie.
Right. So the casting of Liam Neeson wasn't necessarily ruining it.
I think from 1999 to 2005, Liam Neeson dies in like 4 movies as like the mentor character.
But I feel like the lead up to episode 1 was like my first experience of like true hype. Like,
oh my God.
And just
the
like
hype
the
was
childhood hype of like the trailers coming out, and there was like a Star Wars Insider magazine that I subscribed to, and so for like 2 years leading up to it, I was like following every single thing, and I was like, oh, this cool, she's playing Shmi, and this is Anakin. Look, parents, it's young Anakin. And they were like, what's going on? But I was so excited leading up to it.
My dad literally, he was like in New York for work or something, and the FAO Schwartz toy store was like opening at midnight on a certain night to release the episode 1 toys, and he went and stood in line at midnight to go get like the Darth Maul toy and
That's
like
cool.
some key action figures from episode 1. Like that's how big and it was like a huge deal, like lines around the block, like the merch was like real.
Well, I mean, that really is kind of when like fandom, like modern fan in the sense that we say it now, because right at the advent of the internet and like all of that stuff happening, that's when fan groups, I mean, really fandom has existed since the beginning of time. But, you know, sort of like in the 20th century, we think about fandom starting with Star Trek, and that like when conventions really started becoming a thing, and people, you know, got committed and learned every little detail and geekdom, right? But then modern fandom is like very much a product of the internet age. And so 1999, the new Star Wars movies coming out kind of created this perfect storm of fandom in a way that, you know, is what caused those people to be lining up on blocks like 2 weeks before the movie came out and like camping out on their sidewalks and stuff like that.
For episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
Yo, wow.
And we talk about toys and stuff, but I had a friend who was more excited about this stuff than I was, and he worked in a movie theater, so we could just go watch Phantom Menace in the theater whenever we wanted. And we did multiple times, which is just fun to do. But then we'd go to Walmart at 2 a.m, because I grew up in central Pennsylvania where it's that, or go to Denny's. But then he'd look through all the Star Wars toys and be like, oh, I'm going to get my Plo Koon and my Captain Panaka.
Panaka.
Yeah. But it was that weird thing of, you know, we talked about toys being what you know about a thing. I think with Star Wars, even the Star Wars video games, I'll play a Star Wars video game and play it a lot and fall in love with it. And then I'll rewatch one of the movies and I'll see some like structure in the background where I'm like, oh, that's the thing in the middle of that hall. Like the way that external, extracurricular, you know, media can make you fall in love with a different thing. So you're going back and forth and being like, oh, now I appreciate the movie more because of this other thing that I saw or experienced outside of the movie, which Star Wars does really well because it's such a huge world.
And did you guys have Star Wars cards also? Were you Star Wars card collectors?
I'm sure I had some cards, yes.
Man, every guy that I knew, every boy in my grade was like, had all of these Star Wars cards. And they were like the thing to get, because this is like right around Pokemon as well. And so people are collecting Pokemon cards, and then there's Star Wars cards, and that's like what everybody has and they're trading. Wow, we're old.
Did anybody else have like dial-up internet desperately trying to load the trailer for episode 1?
Yes.
Yeah,
the 240p maybe
like
trailer.
The tiny pixelated box, but it was like, you know, that Windows XP like green hills, and then like the ships are appearing, and oh my God, everything is amazing. Like,
I remember they played it on the news. Like I watched it because they played it on the news, because it was news that there was a new Star Wars movie coming out.
You better believe it was news.
Yeah.
Like the hype was insane. Oh my God,
it was
insane. So much fun.
And there was also the fake trailer that was Braveheart footage, but they replaced all the swords with lightsabers.
I think I remember this.
I think it's like Christopher Walken from The Prophecy, and it was like, oh, he's going to be the bad guy and stuff. It's a much better trailer.
Man, fans,
early internet stuff.
fans of things today have it easy.
Yeah.
Things are so accessible. There's like a glut of information now where there's more available than you even want to know.
Right.
Like I've been in, you know, ostrich mode full on for all new Star Warsy things for like the past 2 months easily. Yeah, it's just such a different world.
We have trailers for trailers now.
Yeah.
We have trailers for a teaser for a trailer that has a 5-second teaser for the trailer you're about to watch in case you're going to skip it, and like it's insane.
It's ridiculous.
Well, should we talk about the actual experience of watching The Phantom Menace?
Yes. I think one thing I want to just sort of put forth is that I had in my head kind of a ranking of the prequels of like my favorites. Kind of since, you know, after 3 came out, I kind of had I've been a prequel, not apologist, defender, a staunch defender. Staunch?
Yeah, that's a word. You got it. I mean, are you staunch is the question.
Staunch is a strong word.
Yeah, that's true.
How staunch are you?
I'm going to walk that back. But for a very long time, I just
Casual defender.
Yes, I like that. I just love Star Wars so much. And again, the hype of, growing up, there were the original movies and I loved Star Wars so much, but it was like, oh, it's too bad there will never be another Star Wars movie. And little did I know. But then it was like, they're going to make new Star Wars movies. And just the joy of that, lasted a very long time. That took me many, many years into semi-adulthood. So I had my ranking of the prequels, of which was my favorite, which ones I thought were best. And after revisiting them this last week, that's actually shifted, which I was surprised about.
Mine threatened to shift, but I don't know that it has. But go on.
Well, I want to hear everybody's rankings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Should we just go around?
No, you
quickly?
have to go first.
Yeah, you have to go
because
first
you
now.
built it all up.
Yeah, sure. So originally, 3 was my favorite, 2 was my second favorite, and 1 was my least favorite. Because even as a child, I was very disappointed in episode 1, actually.
Really?
Because as I mentioned in the last episode, I like my Star Wars in space, and episode 1 is very terrestrial and not a whole lot happening. Podcasting. Pod racing is not like space battles, and I was not on board for any of that. Anyway, but so now I think my ranking is actually 2, 3, 1. And we'll get into all of this.
Wow.
Let's continue around. Brian?
So my ranking was, if you listen to Snoop, the Long Beach area code, the 213. I'll talk about my experience with episode 2 later, but I think that 2 might have some of my least favorite stuff of all Star Wars in it. But if you remove that 5 to 10 minutes, I think it's a really solid movie. And 3, as you kind of said, Alex, I just feel like I felt so defeated by 3 seeing it in the theater.
Yeah, that's how I felt too.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sort of has always been my least favorite Star Wars movie, just period. Because I feel like 2 has bad things peppered throughout. 3 is like every scene, even the good scenes, are like, yeah, but also this is here, and also that line is in this scene, and that kind of thing. Rewatching them recently, and then 1 in the middle, just it's fine. And I do have like a little nostalgia seeing it with my friends in high school. Rewatching them, I feel like 3 has aged better for me. I feel like I enjoyed it a little bit more each time I watch it, but I don't think my ranking has changed, but I certainly questioned it.
I'm a very solid 3, 2, 1 person. That's that. I don't feel the need to say more about it, but I'm sure we all will. So
Sure. Okay. So 3, 2, 1. And Alex?
I think I'm with Brian. But actually, it's funny for me. The thing that threatens to shift, just because I don't really like any of them anymore, is that 1 I have the most childhood joy associated with. So now I'm almost like, screw it, 1, 2, 3. But I think if I'm being honest about my actual enjoyment of the movies, probably 2, 1, 3.
Word.
Wowzers.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to talk about here.
Yeah.
So one of the things I also just want to say, so going into episode 1, they're revisiting it. I was reminded that there's so much of the Star Wars universe that I feel makes sense and I like about Star Wars that was introduced in the Phantom Menace, like the idea of Coruscant and Jedi Padawans and double-bladed lightsabers. Force
it's stuff we take for granted now, right? But it wasn't in the original trilogy.
Midichlorians, everyone's favorite.
God.
Hey, you know what? I never minded midichlorians, really. I never thought that was that big a problem. It's the scientific marker of a spiritual thing.
But it removes all the romance of it.
I did appreciate rewatching 1 because obviously, yes, that is the most criticized thing about the Force is this unknowable thing, and oh no, it's scientific. But I did appreciate that it was the midichlorians make you more sensitive to this mysterious, unknowable thing. It was like, yeah, the Force itself isn't necessarily different, but having that sort of
it's like a sciencey way of explaining why some people are strong with the Force,
right?
Yeah,
which is frustrating, but not literally saying here's why he has superpowers because his blood is mutated or something.
Right,
Right. And catching that detail this time around did help me reconcile some of my feelings with the Metachlorians. And even things like Sith, like the idea of Sith, didn't happen.
Right, the
Right.
word
Episode
Sith
1.
is not an original trilogy.
Yeah. So lots of good things came from the Phantom Menace.
Well, so here's my defense of the Phantom Menace. It's an indefensible movie. I mean, I mean, it's almost Brechtian the way the dialogue is delivered
Yes.
throughout in a way that is almost astonishing.
Yes.
Where the way people talk in that movie is utterly lifeless.
Yes.
It's almost, I don't know how it could be unintentional after a certain point. Like, did all the actors just kind of agree we're going to approach this with like kind of a stoic? I don't know. I just don't understand how they managed to pull that off. You know, nobody broke the stoic, dispassionate delivery of dialogue.
I don't know. You've got your side characters. You've got your Watto and your boss.
That's true.
Nass
That's true.
and,
I guess
know.
everybody who's CG got
Yeah.
colorful, but all all the humans that were like real humans, like across the board. Like,
Yeah.
stoic delivery. It's really amazing.
Obi-Wan has some moments.
Well, I feel like, and those are amazing too, because I feel like
Seeing Ian McGregor try
they're
to
supposed to be
act-
like the jokes. Like
Oh,
he's like,
boy.
negotiations were short.
I
Like-
I remember even as a 13-year-old that being like a breaking point where I was like, I need to lower my expectations in this moment.
Well, I didn't even understand like what was happening in that moment, because I like it's the way like it cuts out of that scene at that moment. It plays as if that was supposed to be like a joke to end the scene with, but it doesn't play as a joke. So it's just a weird last line that doesn't really make sense to my child brain. And so I just kind of like was confused by why he said that and what it meant.
For me-
I didn't get anything from it.
Ewan McGregor is my favorite part of the prequels. So
Sure.
you
For
know,
sure, yeah.
at the very least, I'm like, hey, he's on screen.
yeah.
But
Sure.
I'm here to defend episode 1. So
Okay, go.
episode 1, I still feel looks like a movie, and
Okay.
I actually like the way it's shot a lot. I think there's a level of craft to the cinematography and the way shots are framed, the way action scenes are staged, the way that just it kind of has a filmic quality to it that still feels like Star Wars to me, just from a format perspective. Whereas 2 and 3, I start to feel like I'm in like an artist's rendering for like a proposed architectural building, and like, but we have living people walking around it. Like
This may collapse. We're not sure.
I feel like I'm in like an early rendering for this like room in Coruscant, but it hasn't been finished yet. But now we're gonna like put the live actors in it. Like there's a lot of there's a vibe in 2 and 3 that does not feel like a film anymore to me. And episode 1, a lot of the CG has not held up so great, especially the Gungans. But that aside, there's a feeling and a craft to a lot of the shots and a lot of the places, a lot of the production design, the costumes. It still just feels rich and like a movie to me in a way that by episode 3, I just feel so disengaged, and I feel like it's so bouncy CG nothingness. And episode 1 retained a little bit of that OG trilogy vibe for me in that way.
Yeah, like episode 3, when it's just Yoda and Palpatine are just throwing booths at each other. I was like, we're just watching a cartoon.
I mean,
now.
I'm kind of down for that part just because it's like fan service.
No, but I mean visually.
Visually,
we're
sure.
this is just a cartoon now. Like there's
I think-
No, seriously.
I think
the way
worse-
they move
yeah.
around that space is like pure cartoony.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think worse is Obi-Wan on like the lizard thing next to like a hamster ball. Like,
Yeah.
we'll get to that. But.
Well, I feel like I want to enter this as one of the first like universal filmmaking lessons that I think everyone should take away from the prequels. And I think the first one is don't have people ride CG animals. It doesn't look good.
Right.
True.
In any of them. It's still in modern movies, most of the time it looks really bad. And it bothers me so much anytime anyone's riding an animal in these prequels because it looks awful.
Ding. Lesson number 1.
Well, I was thinking about CG in general, especially after we talked about the despecialized editions of the original trilogy. And I was thinking, rewatching the prequels, like makeup in a movie 50 years ago is never going to look worse. It's always going to look the way that it looked. CG is always only ever going to look as good as it looked the year that movie came out. So if I go back and I watch, if you watch Nosferatu, like,
Yeah.
Max Schreck still looks great. Like, but then sometimes you watch CG from 2 years ago and you're like, they didn't really have that yet, or they couldn't do this yet. And I think that's the unfortunate thing, especially with the CG in the original trilogy, is you're like, oh, I'd rather see the guy in the wolf mask. I'd rather see the ship on a string than see what looked good in 1997 or what looked good in 2004, whenever the DVDs were released. So yeah, that's just an interesting choice about CG in general, is just because it looks good today doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to look good.
Yeah. And to George Lucas's credit, and this is my defense of Phantom Menace, you can fault him for a lot of things here, and you can fault the choices that he made, but there is no doubt that he took some risks and made some choices. He definitely did not do what was completely expected of him.
Right.
He went out on a limb. He made some choices that he probably knew were going to piss off some fans.
It's a movie about a trade blockade.
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, that's the whole thing. Like, you cast a very young child in a very important role.
Mm-hmm.
That's a choice and a risk. Like,
Definitely a risk.
I mean, there's all kinds of things here that Gungans come to mind as a big risk. Lots of this stuff, but and some of the stuff that we also love. So I'm citing the things that are making us giggle, but you've pointed it out, Michael. It's like this stuff that we actually really love. Double-bladed lightsaber, Coruscant is cool. Like, all of these things do work. They were bold decisions on George Lucas's part, and I tend to respect that from a filmmaker when I see it. And some of them do work.
Yeah,
it's also the first Star Wars movie to have just a lot of lightsaber play.
Yeah,
and I think every time someone is doing flips with the lightsaber, I just get excited and I'm happy. And I'll say something possibly really controversial, which is, from a pure visual and choreography standpoint, I think the lightsaber duel in episode 1 is the best.
Yes.
of
I
any
agree.
movie.
No
not
contest.
controversial.
I agree.
Agreed.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
It's a cool idea. The staging of it is cool. Like,
3 different colors. Like,
yeah.
And that's actually one of the parts of the movie that actually hits emotionally.
Yes.
Yeah.
When Ewan McGregor goes one-on-one with him at the very end after he's killed Qui-Gon.
Yeah.
Ewan McGregor really has an emotional experience there. And it comes through. It's actually a real moment in a movie full of strangely dead performances.
It's a simple choice with those doors, right?
Yes.
Like, it's really simple, but because you can see through them, because he can see, what's going on. So he's part of the action, but there's nothing he can do to engage it for an limited but unknown amount of time. It really ups the tension and makes that work. And so, like, we haven't done a deep dive into like action sequence writing yet, although I would love to at some point. But one of the best things you can do when you're writing an action sequence is create obstacles in the environment that prevent, like, that essentially split the characters up.
Right.
And give, it helps to create those dynamics we always talk about within the sequence, where it's like, this part isn't action now. It has to wait. And so it builds tension until it explodes again, when they can again engage each other.
And I love just Qui-Gon like meditating while
Yeah.
Darth Maul
Yeah.
paces like a panther back and forth.
It's
that's
great.
another like new thing you don't see Jedi actually meditating in
Right.
that way in earlier Star Wars movies. So yeah, there's a lot in this movie that we take for granted now. And one thing I wanted to bring up as a lesson is, if you're gonna have a twist, like, Padme is the queen and there's been a stand-in for the queen, but also the queen's been actually Natalie Portman some of the time, but not all the time. Like, you gotta set that twist up better.
Hang a lantern on it.
It did not hit for me as a child. I was like, what's happening now? And like, I love Jake Lloyd's face during that moment.
Yeah.
She steps
Ding,
forward.
lesson 2.
So yeah, what went wrong there? Because that's a really strange part of this movie, is this idea that it's supposed to be this big reveal, but it just doesn't land. Because
I think I was watching going, we know what Natalie Portman and Keira Knightley look like now. And I think that I was watching it going, realizing that you see Natalie Portman on screen the first time you see Amidala, and then it's Keira Knightley basically for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
So
but then for part of the time on Coruscant, it's Natalie Portman again.
Right, but
when
I
she's,
feel
in
like
the Senate.
But I feel like at least intention-wise, whether or not it worked for people or not, intention-wise, it was by that time you're not looking at Amidala's face anymore. You're like, there's Padme and there's the Queen, and they're two separate people, and that's hard to do when you're literally having different people play a character's face. But
yeah, but you gotta have one line of dialogue of like, you know, there are many enemies. We are always watching for her safety, or just something,
some setup,
some kind of setup.
And you know, Padme doesn't talk like she's stoned all the time. So
Everyone is stoned.
I will not sign a
trade
trade with Federation.
I will not condone a course of action. Well, one of the things that I think bothers me is that it's inconsistent, because if it was like the entire movie up until that moment, they'd been switched, like after the first scene, then there's kind of a, okay, maybe I can get behind this quote unquote twist, but it goes back and forth throughout the movie. Like, and I remember I had to read, I think, like an ancillary, like kids book about Queen Amidala back when this came out that literally explained which parts of the movie is which person to like follow it.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, oh, now that I'm on Coruscant, like, you know, Padme thought to herself, now this is too important for my like handmaid to deal with. I've got to retain my position as queen. And it was like, this is way too confusing. This does not make sense for a movie.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like my thing is that it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't pay off
Right.
that much.
There's no
like
why is everybody shocked about it? Also,
Right.
like it's not,
Like,
didn't change anything.
it kind of stands in for, you know, they go see the Gungans and they're like, we want you to die for us. And they're like, we don't know about this. And then and then Padme's like, wait a minute, I'm the queen. And then everyone's like, oh.
And then he says, you are not thinking you are better than the Gungans?
No, Usan.
Like this.
Oh God.
Ow.
You're welcome, human ears.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. It's like they go to so much trouble to create a confusing plot element that they're then trying to pay off. The setup is not strong and not strongly established, but the payoff also isn't enough of a payoff for it to seem like the whole, you know, all those complexities were justified. Like, or this goes back to maybe what we were talking about with like Ocean's 11, where it's like, if you're gonna like pay off something or like have it be a thing, it's not fun if it's not something we could never have figured out ever. And in this case, we basically could never have figured it out ever because we're just believing what the movie tells us. There has been no history of like the movie trying to deceive us.
Right.
At that point. So we
It's
just
just
buy
not
what
satisfying.
we see with our eyes. We're like, the woman in that costume is that character. I believe that.
Right. Well, and I feel like, and maybe this can help bridge us toward episode 2, where I think part of the reason it was there upon rewatching it was this idea of Padme wants to sneak out and see the rest of the world and like take in what is
Pulling
it?
a Princess Jasmine.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Of like, and like on paper, that's cool. I think that is an interesting idea that could be what the story was had it been executed differently, and she discovers this person and all that stuff.
Oh my God, I just want that movie now. I just want, like, you know, Anakin like riff raff, straight raff,
running around on Tatooine.
One thing I'll say also that struck me watching it this time was just how forced that scene is between Anakin and Padme after they leave Tatooine, where the entire time they're on Tatooine, she's complaining about the fact that they're trusting this boy. Why are we still here? Why are we giving him, you know, our fate with this pod race? Yada, yada, yada. And then on the ship, like 5 minutes later, she's like, I really care for you.
Yeah.
Like things will change on Coruscant, but I'll never stop caring for you. It's like, what? This relationship was never actually established.
I feel like all the prequels read like a first draft.
right?
Where it's like,
Yeah.
this is what I want the movie to kind of look like.
Right.
And I put all the scenes together, and then, you know, you're supposed to revise it like a million more times, but instead they went and made it.
Right.
That's how it
I just
feels.
imagine reading that first draft being like, why are there 20 pages that are blank except for in the middle it just says pod racing continues?
Well, and like the version that's on Disney Plus, or like the official
the
version that's out
DVD
there,
version.
is like an extended pod race scene with
Right.
like,
Oh, good.
it introduces more characters that don't mean anything at
Right.
the beginning of the
Mhm.
pod race. You get to see all of them die, you know, like, And that's where I was feeling, oh, this is really just merchandise now. And it's for like the pod racer game, which I loved.
It was a great game. It was objectively a great game.
So I recognize all those characters from the game.
Right.
But we don't need to see all of them wave to the audience in this movie for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. Beyond the Screenplay is brought to you by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes for creators, entrepreneurs, and curious people everywhere. You can take classes in writing, photography, filmmaking, and more. You name it, they've got it. So whether you're picking up a new skill for your day job, figuring out your next side project, or pursuing a long-time passion, Skillshare has classes for you. I love learning with tutorials. Having someone walk you through the steps and show you how to actually make a specific thing has always helped me quickly understand whatever concept I'm trying to learn. Skillshare is basically a site full of exactly that. Since we're discussing the prequels and character design, I thought I'd recommend a class called Writing Authentic Fiction: How to Build a Believable Character by author Sabah Tahir. It's a quick class that details her process for designing characters, highlighting different techniques and strategies she uses. And as we all know, having compelling characters is key to having a compelling story. I'll include the link to her class in the show notes, along with our special Beyond the Screenplay Skillshare link. Our listeners will get 2 months of unlimited access to thousands of classes for free. Just head to Skillshare.com/beyondthescreenplay. Once again, that's Skillshare.com/beyondthescreenplay to get your first 2 months of Skillshare for free. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring Beyond the Screenplay.
Some of the things that are really troubling or just don't really work here are the character motivations, because it isn't just the dialogue. Now, the way that they express their motivations is eye-rolly. But if the motivations made sense and felt earned, we would kind of be on board with it. Because as we talked about in the last episode about the original trilogy, it's like stilted dialogue is not exactly new to the Star Wars universe. It wasn't started in the prequels. There was always sort of stilted Shakespearean kind of dialogue. But the character motivations always made sense, and partly because, as we talked about last time, they were simple enough to understand. The problem is when you have characters doing things that are not simple or clean-cut or clear motivations, it's hard for us to really get on board with them. And that's when we start to the dialogue really starts to grate on us, where it's like, you are giving me a line of wood in dialogue instead of a real motivation.
Right.
And that is when we really start to jump ship on a movie, is when the character motivations are not logically supported by the plot or anything that has gone on. Not just when the dialogue is badly delivered, because to be quite frank, it's mostly undeliverable.
Right. I feel like we cannot blame the actors at all.
No blame to the actors. And I love, we'll get to episode 3, but I love how I feel in episode 3, Natalie Portman is just done. She's just like,
God bless her.
She's like, I'm done. I'm
I'm
gonna stand on this blue screen. I'm gonna say these lines. This is it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you have Liam Neeson, and he does he does better than most, but also
he's pretty great.
Qui-Gon has understandable goals and motivations.
Right. Also, Anakin's mom is pretty great.
Yeah.
I like Shmi.
I like her too.
Yeah. I had this moment watching it where I was like, Natalie Portman, Liam Neeson, and Ewan McGregor were in a movie together.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
But it was the Phantom Menace. That's so frustrating.
Well, I have a sort of theory about Star Wars, the original 6, which is that every actor is one notch down from their ability.
They're being downgraded
with a few
movies.
exceptions. Harrison Ford, because he just chose not to care in a way that I think worked incredibly well and made his character one of the best characters of all time. Ewan McGregor in his final "You were the chosen one" speech, where he's just excellent. And then, unfortunately, Ian McDiarmid during his "No, you will die" or whatever. And it's he's pretty good in these movies, except when he's not.
I love him in these movies. I think he stands out as actually.
I love the idea of him,
the most consistent performance across all 6 movies. Yeah.
Right.
And
because he's the only person that's in more or less all 6.
I also like Samuel L. Jackson.
Sure.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like him. Mace Windu, again, clearly very easily understandable. I get what he wants in every scene. I have no problem with it.
Also very stoic, but a
Yeah.
Jedi, so maybe that's just
Kinda
In a way
kinda
that's a
works for
sort
the
of
character.
waste of Samuel
I mean,
Jackson.
sure.
Right.
You believe it's in this boy? Like you hired Sam Jackson to say this party's over. You know?
What, episode 2?
Right. Well, so yeah, that's a good transition to episode 2. Revisiting Attack of the Clones this time.
Which is the name of episode 2.
you remember
Every
when-
time you hear it, you're just like, who
Is
let
it
this?
that much weirder than anything else?
Yeah.
It
I mean,
is.
Phantom Menace
It
is cool.
Name
Like, it's
another
just a
movie that starts
cool
with
title.
Attack of the that isn't 50-foot woman or Killer Tomatoes.
Crab monsters.
Yeah.
Do you remember when they announced the title?
No.
No.
There were like headlines about it, and I remember having a sinking feeling of like, what?
Oh
Mm.
no!
Wait, that's a Star Wars movie? It's called Attack of the Clones? What?
I definitely remember having that, but forcing myself to power through and be like, but this one's going to be better because he learned his lesson. And I remember going into Attack of the Clones and people were coming out of a screening and I was like standing with my friend. We were nervous and we were like, how was it? And I remember this woman's face and she had the biggest smile on her face and she was like,
good.
it was great. And I was like, yes, they did it. Let's go see Attack of the Clones.
Oh,
And
that's
so,
sweet.
so like you were saying, Brian, watching Attack of the Clones this time for me, I was bracing myself to hate it because again, I remember it as being cringy. Like all the love story stuff is the stuff that immediately comes to mind.
That stuff feels like it's 30
really
minutes of the
bad.
movie and it's 5 minutes of the movie.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what, and watching it again, I think Attack of the Clones was maybe the one I enjoyed the most actually as a kid because I was high school, I was into action, cool lightsaber things, but also I was emo and there was like a love story. The love theme, John Williams' love theme, I think is actually very beautiful.
John Williams is great in these movies.
I mean, I might say he's the real hero of these movies.
right.
He's the
Duel of the
protagonist.
Fates.
Duel
I
of
mean,
Duel of the Fates.
Yeah.
it's legit.
It's amazing.
I do think though that this is another, if we're gonna ding another lesson here, where too much score, he's doing so much work. The score is doing
Right.
so much
It
work.
is. It has to.
Exactly. It's wall to wall score because otherwise it's not a movie. Like you don't have like emotion happening. And I was very conscious of that where I was like, I want the music to stop, but if it stopped, nothing would be happening right now.
Although sometimes he'll stop it like during a lightsaber battle or something.
Yeah,
Like he'll
it's
stop it
kinda
in
cool.
really
Right.
effective ways sometimes.
Yeah.
But you got to carry us through these Anakin Padme scenes.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
You got
otherwise,
something.
it's just too hard.
Yeah. But so Attack of the Clones on paper is, I think, the Star Wars movie that I want to make. Like I would love to go and remake because it's a noir love story detective. Like it feels the most old timey.
It is
like,
a detective story.
It's a caper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A caper is a good word.
It feels like the Big Sleep almost, but like in space, and like it makes as little sense as the Big Sleep also. But it's
Yeah.
like, and so it's just, and it has, there's rain. Anytime there's rain in a movie, thumbs up. There's
Then
a lightsaber
it's
fight
noir
in
automatically.
the rain. Yeah.
Yep.
And there's like the whole chase through Coruscant, which
is really cool.
cool. And I realized watching it that it's just Blade Runner. It's just
It
Los
definitely
Angeles.
is. Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Right,
yeah.
Which I hadn't realized before. So I feel like on paper, the story and the idea of what it is as just a unit of like storytelling is so cool. And I wish it was the best version of itself.
I think without a doubt, episode 2 is the only of the prequel movies you can explain the plot of in about 2 sentences.
Yeah.
The rest of them, there's so much else going on. Like we just talked about with episode 1, there's a lot of, and then this, but then also this, and she's pretending to be that. Episode 2 is like one guy is going off to figure out who tried to kill someone. The other guy's protecting her. They fall in love. That's episode 2. Like
Yeah.
that is the plot of that movie.
But I will say, within those plots, I feel like the mystery itself and the way it unravels is just as convoluted and weird as
Sure.
Phantom Menace to me.
Right. But it feels more focused than the other two, I would say.
Sure. I watching it again, I was like, okay, so there's Cypher Dyas. I think that is the person that is also Count Dooku, who is also known as Lord Tyrannus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
I think
Darth
so.
Tyrannus.
We don't
Darth-
know that he's Cypher
I don't think,
Dyas, But
So
I don't
who
think
is
we know
Cypher
who
Dyas?
Cypher Dyas is.
He
He's
died
the
10 years
person
ago
who ordered the army.
for somebody.
Was it Qui-Gon? Like, what are we supposed to make of that? And like, why introduce all these names with
See,
no payoff?
Alex, you're making us look bad.
I don't
we
know that
all
there
just
isn't.
watched this movie.
I tried really hard.
just watched
No,
it.
figure it
I was
out.
watching it like very intensely, being like, okay, I'm gonna get it this time. Like, there's got to be a payoff for this Cypher Diaz thing. They say his name so many times.
They really say his name too many times.
It's like all about this mysterious character. And I thought at the end, when Count Dooku goes and talks to Lord Sidious, he was gonna be like, and you, Cypher Diaz, did the plant. But he's like, you, Darth Tyrannus. Wait, what? Another name? Why?
I have a lesson to ding here.
Yes, dang.
Okay. Lesson number 4. Don't introduce your villains off screen during the crawl. It doesn't work. We get that with Count Dooku. It happens with him. It also happens with General Grievous in the third one. It's like,
Which
why are you
super doesn't work with.
Why are you introducing one of your main characters supposed to be this very menacing villain to me in the crawl? And then everyone's acting like I should already know who he is. It was like that feeling. I remember when I first saw both episodes 2 and 3, where I was like, should I know who this person is? Is he from the previous movies? It gives you that feeling where you're like, he was in a book I should have read, or someone else knows who he is. That feeling that probably you have when you go to Marvel movies, Alex,
right.
where you're like, who's this villain? I should know who he is, right? And
Or these aliens, or
surely
whatever,
other people
yeah.
know exactly who they are. Who's this hero? Oh, we know whatever, this side character. It gives you that feeling where you're like, I don't know anything about this person, and therefore it's really hard to be scared of them.
Well, in A New Hope, Darth Vader,
This
I think,
is what
is
I'm
in the
saying.
scrawl, but he's in the first scene also.
And we see him come in and do something incredibly menacing.
Right.
General Grievous just coughs.
Yeah, for no explained reason in the movie.
Well, and also as a villain, he's not very easily understandable. He is a sick robot.
What is
Yeah.
he? But he's got organic parts. Well, that's episode 3.
Right.
Yeah.
I actually did look up a lot of stuff about General Grievous because I was like,
Right.
There
It's
are
ex-
explanations.
Yeah, just not in the movie
but not
that
in
he's
the
in.
movie.
Right.
Right. Same thing with Dooku.
So real quick,
Exhausting.
I just consulted Wikipedia.
Yeah.
And Cypher Diaz was a human male Jedi Master from Minishi. And
Sure.
he had this idea. He saw the war coming. He said, let's build a clone army. They said, no, get off the Jedi Council. And he said, well, screw you. I'm going to go do it anyway. And then he went to go make the thing. Count Dooku realized he was doing it, shot it down a ship, and then they took over the cloning project.
Like, we shouldn't have to look it up on Wikipedia.
Absolutely.
Like, it should just be like Count Dooku did it or whatever. Like, one of the characters in the movie did it who's working for
Instead of an
the-
unnamed character who we never meet or find out anything about.
Right.
Well, and so this is a thing that I was thinking about as far as the continuation of episode, going from 1, 2, and 3 and the continuation of the story across the prequels. And I feel like 2 and 3 have trajectory to them. There's plot holes constantly, but I feel like, they introduced the Death Star. I think that's one of the reasons I liked 2 when it came out, is it felt like Star Wars, where it was like, oh, I can see now, like how these dots are going to connect to the movies I already know. And I feel like episode 1 has very little of that.
Mhm.
Like, it's just Anakin, basically.
And it's very
like the senator.
It's very Naboo centric.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like there's a lot
Too
of
much
politics
Yeah.
that you don't understand how they're gonna play out and connect to the movies later.
Well, speaking of which, like, what is Palpatine's? I think Red Letter Media gets into some of this in their amazing Star Wars breakdowns. But Palpatine, like, I think this whole trilogy is like his master plan to become emperor, basically.
Mhm.
And because he's orchestrating both sides all the time. Like, he's
Right.
telling the Trade Federation to do stuff in episode 1, but also playing the senator from Naboo.
Also very confusing.
Yeah, and so it's like he's like playing insane 3D chess with, like, let's do a trade blockade to cause this to happen, then I'll become Supreme Chancellor, and then I'll make the separatists with my Count Dooku Padawan do this so that the war starts, and then I have an army. And like, it's crazy 3D chess, which is so convoluted.
Yeah.
It's just, I like the idea that it's a trilogy about how the Emperor rose to power, but I wish it was a coherent story of that.
Yeah, or like, instead of it being some kind of master plan, what if we just saw the Emperor acting opportunistic, right? Where
Right.
things go south, with this like trade deal or whatever. Okay, so let's say events outside of the Emperor's control, Palpatine's control, go south, and he steps in and sees an opportunity for himself, and then we kind of see him manipulating a little bit here and there, and then we see another opportunity that presents itself, and he like steps in to snatch that. I think that would actually be a little bit more understandable. Again, we understand his motivations. Why is he doing it? Okay, he sees a chance to gain power.
Right.
And also having him play both sides is kind of not believable, as well as being very confusing what we're talking about. Like, so I can tell that the people that the bad guys are getting their orders from is the same guy that everybody is like trying to protect and listen to, because it's just him in a robe that's over half of his face.
Right.
So like, I can tell that as an audience member. No one in the movie seems to have any idea, which is also incredibly confusing. It's like, are you trying to fool me, the audience member? If so, you fail.
Right.
I don't
What
understand.
are we supposed to understand?
Right.
I
How
feel
much
like
are we supposed to know?
that's maybe like one of the most critical
Yes.
problems with the prequels is like, I don't understand like who the movie is for, who's the protagonist, what do you think I know, what do you think I'm supposed to think that I know,
Yeah.
and when, like, it's clearly, it's the Emperor playing this long game. He's a senator, but like you linger on him in the last shot of episode, like it's clearly being like, look guys, it's the Emperor, but you still want it to be a twist. It's very
Right.
puzzling.
Are we supposed
From
to
a
not know who the
perspective.
Emperor is, or are we supposed to know the whole time? And if we're
Right.
supposed to know the whole time, then like why don't you play it that way?
Mhm.
Like it's playing it as if it's a twist. Yeah.
My girlfriend did, I think, early into episode 3 when we rewatched him. She said, oh, "He's working for the Emperor, right?" And I said, "Are you serious?" And she said, "What?" And I said, "He is the Emperor." She said, "Oh, okay. Oh, that makes." And like as soon as I said it, she was like, "Oh, of course he is," But it was like the fact that like we are watching these movies from like Star Wars nerd tower,
Sure.
like
It's
and
the
not
exact thing we're talking about.
just right.
Yeah.
The only thing we can tell is that these two people don't have any chemistry,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a weird age gap between them.
Yep. Ding ding. Important lessons. Also, like scenes should have conflict in them. Also, subtext is really important.
Yeah.
Like, I think-
Oh man, the dialogue,
subtext.
the on the nose romance dialogue.
Yeah.
Like-
My God.
And I think this is maybe one of the most important lessons you can take from it is, what does it look like when you don't have subtext?
Right.
What is it when the entire love story is spoken directly
Right.
out loud and like the fireside scene, right?
Well, I
Oh,
just love how
yes.
it just cuts to that
Exactly.
scene. They're just sitting silently. She's in a dominatrix outfit, but she's like,
Admittedly,
George-
she looks amazing.
yeah.
But that George Lucas designed himself.
You don't say.
Yeah.
Oh, and then she's like, "Wait, what? Like, but I'm a senator. You're a Jedi." It's like, what is this? How did they end up in this room? Like, what were they doing before the scene started? Like, what?
It's amazing. It's fucking amazing. Like the cut, because it's the right before that he's
Truly.
doing the force pair scene.
Also, I like how
hate the
I
forced
realized this
pair.
time that their dinner is like a piece of fruit each. Like they bring out
That's what people eat on Naboo. It's the traditional food of their
they're
culture,
served
Alex.
dinner plates and then like a bowl of like 3 pears is put between them.
Oh, I hate all of that so much. And they eat it with a fork and a knife.
Fork and a knife.
But then it just cuts inexplicably and we have an establishing shot, but nothing's happening.
Nothing's happening.
And then he just launches into this monologue, and I just feel so bad for Hayden Christensen.
Yeah.
Like, to be given that, like, this is, like, the pre-existing circumstances of the scene are question
Apparently
marks.
don't matter.
Yeah.
And now you're going into
There's
this.
no moment before.
Right,
This is it. Yeah.
right.
And this is like really basic love story writing. This is very much a ding. I think we're at lesson 9 or something by now.
Sure.
But very basic love story writing, people have to fall in love for a reason. That
Right.
means they have to have something in common that they deeply connect about, a way they see the world, that they deeply understand each other. Like,
But Anakin's grown, and she's grown more beautiful, I mean.
Yeah.
So,
because anytime they're
And
not
she's-
talking about their romance, which I'm honestly kind of grateful for, anytime they stray away from how they feel
So
about
yeah,
each
just
other.
talk about democracy, please. Yeah.
But even that is like, she's like democracy. He's like fascism. It's just like,
And then he
No.
makes up for it by riding a giant flea. And
again,
then it's like
this goes back to lesson number 1.
And
Don't
they
have
roll
characters
for-
riding CG animals.
right.
And they roll for 3 miles until
And then stop, and then wipe. Too many wipes. When you have that many wipes,
Right.
there's something wrong with your script.
The original trilogy didn't have that many transitions.
No.
Like
It didn't need them.
Yeah.
What was your thought, Alex?
my thought was I was getting so many Tommy Wiseau The Room vibes watching the love story this time.
Wait, have you seen the cuts of him in Star Wars?
No.
Oh, it's amazing. Okay, go ahead.
But I understand the like crossover because there's so many moments in their love story in 2 and 3 that it felt literally like it was lifted out of The Room. If you haven't seen The Room, it's like one of the best, worst movies of all time. And a lot of it is painful, weird, horrible romance dialogue. And it honestly, there were some moments that felt at that level in these movies, which I was blown away by.
But it is something, going back to being positive, trying to. It is something that, as you were saying, it feels like the first draft. It is something that nuancing the dialogue and developing the characters a bit further could really fix. Like, again, if you gave these two characters something real to connect over, right? So let's say, he's going through his Jedi training and he's learning patience and he's learning like patience is really hard for him. And she's like, well, I feel that way. Diplomacy sometimes requires a lot of patience. Literally anything.
Yeah.
Right? Something that they're like learning, growing together, seeing the world in a similar way. That's what romance develops based on. Give them some kind of life experiences that speak into why they are attracted to each other.
I was having basically exactly that thought that you were saying of
you
like,
could have fixed it.
it's weird because structurally, they go off and he's protecting her on Naboo, and then like they fall in love because reasons, and then he has this premonition with his mom, and then they go on this adventure, but they're kind of already in love. And I feel like maybe even just saving like they're falling in love across this whole thing, and like him dealing with a decently powerful situation where he loses his mom and he like gives into the dark side in a way that I feel like is earned. Like I get that like you'd be upset, you'd kill all the sand people, like,
And the women and the children, they're like animals. And I murdered them like animals.
I hate them.
I feel like it's that thing where, once again, on paper, it all works, but then just the way it all plays out and the way it's delivered and the way people react to things, just none of it makes sense.
Yeah, you have to do, again, character work, basic character work. So thinking about, okay, so Anakin has been gone for how long now? So if you want to earn that choice with the Sand People, I think it's a strong choice. Put your character in a situation, force him to make a difficult decision. That's where character is revealed. Great and fine. But we have to have some kind of like, maybe right at the beginning, he's been having dreams about his mother. He feels like he should go back to see her, right?
Right.
It becomes the thread of this whole thing where he's like, I shouldn't have left her like that. As soon as I finish my training, I'm going to go back and find her. Something along those lines. And then also the work between him and Obi-Wan could be really deepened as well. Where if he felt like, because you really sort of have to set up Obi-Wan as like a father figure to him, but their dynamic never really deepens to that place for it to feel, or even like they're trying to go for brothers, right? Because that's what he says in this final thing.
They're like opening banter with each other. It's so painful. Like it's trying to do that thing, but it's the first draft bad version.
Why do I feel like you're going to be the death of me someday?
Nest of Gundarks.
Right, but if you buy, when you watch The Phantom Menace, you buy that the age difference between Liam Neeson, right, and then Obi-Wan Ian McGregor, and then Jake Lloyd, you're like, okay, this actually could be like this generational handing down of wisdom. There could be this veneration towards the father figure, towards the Jedi Master that is internalized, where it then becomes a real struggle anytime we see Anakin like push back or want to go a different way. None of that work is really done though, because Anakin is just kind of cheeky from the beginning, and Obi-Wan puts up with it in a way that is totally confusing and doesn't earn that tension. So when that split happens, when they turn against each other, it doesn't feel as weighty as it could.
Well, and also Anakin's very whiny from the very beginning.
Yeah.
The opening scenes with him and Padme when they're by themselves are just him complaining to her all the time.
I hate it here. Yeah.
The beginning of their love story is just him whining and complaining constantly.
It's basically, what if Luke couldn't go to Tashi Station to get power converters, and that drove him to be whiny for a trilogy?
And eventually turn to the dark side.
Yeah.
Can I talk real quick about my experience seeing episode 2? Because this is a very positive thing. My buddy, who is a big Star Wars fan, he said, do you want to go to New York to the Ziegfeld Theater, which is like a 1,000-person theater or something, to see episode 2? And I said, sounds fun. So we got tickets to the 6 a.m. showing the day it came out. So we went up at noon the day before, or like 9 in the morning the day before or something, to be in the long sidewalk line. While we're waiting in line, someone comes over, hey kid, you want to buy some tickets? And we ended up getting tickets to the 3 a.m. showing. And then while we're standing in line talking to people, we end up getting tickets to the midnight showing. So I ended up seeing episode 2 3 times within the first 9 hours it was out.
Wow.
Which was a lot of fun. And I could tell you that the Yoda lightsaber duel was just as exciting the third time in a theater full of 1,000 people as it was the first time. It was so fun.
The whole finale of that movie, I do remember seeing it in theaters the first time, and it was exhilarating.
Mm-hmm.
The audience reaction was amazing.
I was like literally on my seat, like
from the this party's over through the end.
Yeah.
I think it's just like pure fan service amazingness
Totally.
Like-
on opening night. Yeah.
Like you've never seen that many lightsabers in a frame before.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
15-year-old
So cool.
brain had a meltdown.
Right.
It's
Yes.
like it's the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
So while we're waiting in line, we actually brought a laptop and we're watching the Phantom Menace on the laptop. So we're just like laying down on the sidewalk watching Phantom Menace. And then suddenly I see a shadow out of the corner of my eye, and it's someone holding a puppet of Triumph the Insult Comic Dog, the Robert Smigel puppet from Conan. He's like, for me to poop on, that whole thing. And he just goes, oh, Jar Jar Binks, he's cool, huh? And I say, yeah, for me to poop on. And he goes, oh, you think you're funny, huh? And I look up, and it's Robert Smigel holding Triumph the Insult Comic Dog, and there are cameras on me.
Of course, Brian.
And then he says, do you think George Lucas could use CGI to make it look like you have a girlfriend?
Wow.
Nice.
And I said, no, I don't think that technology's there yet. And then whatever. So I was like, oh, I was just interviewed by Triumph the Insult Comic Dog. And unfortunately, that video is online. You can watch Triumph at the Star Wars line, and it's awesome. And a lot of the people there, I'm like, oh, that guy being interviewed is sitting in a circle talking to us in this moment. But my interview didn't make the cut. Sadly.
So sorry, Brian.
Yeah.
On the editing floor somewhere.
Yeah.
When I heard that you got tickets, though, 3 times in a row, I guess I naively immediately inferred that you would have given up some of your other tickets to let other people see the later showing.
Nah.
No.
You saw it 3 times in 9 hours.
Yeah. We also got to see the Men in Black 3 trailer, or no, 2. Yeah, 2. And Matrix Reloaded Revolution. So sitting in a theater with 1,000 people,
That's
and
pretty awesome.
the screen goes black, and then you just hear like, tick, 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 and the little green characters come down. And then you have Will Smith going, are you ready to wear the last suit you'll ever wear for the rest of your life? Again. So by the third time, we're
Those are
like,
good trailers.
we're going,
They are good trailers.
again. It was a really fun time.
Aw.
And appropriately, he and I are going to see episode 9 twice in the first 2 days that it's out. So I'm all right. I'm all
What an
set.
adorable friendship.
Some things
Yeah.
never change.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So I think, like we said, the finale of Attack of the Clones was very satisfying at the time. Seeing Yoda jump around was like, what? That's crazy.
Yeah.
And the reveal of the purple lightsaber,
Awesome.
awesome. The best lightsaber.
Also, there's a moment of two-handed lightsaber fighting, which
Yeah.
I think should have gone on way longer. It's like a very brief part of the lightsaber fight at the end, but it's like what I always wanted.
Yeah.
We have double-bladed. Now let's do some two-hander.
Thank you for bringing this up
Yeah.
because this is one of the lessons I want to ding. I was going to wait for 3, but
Do the full scene two-hander.
right. Like no one likes going from more lightsabers to less lightsabers.
Nope.
Right.
If you're going to have an action
Fewer, but
sequence,
you're
you
right.
need to get more over time or something.
Yeah.
But like don't slowly cut
Well,
the double bladed in
Episode
half.
3 does test that.
With General
theory.
Grievous.
But again, it's like, but then it goes down.
Yeah.
It's eye rolly, and then he cuts off 2 immediately, and so what was the point of this?
Mm-hmm.
But like it's Anakin Skywalker. Like, let's give him a whole scene where he's using 2
Exactly.
lightsabers at
Lightsabers.
once.
No,
Exactly.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Also, episode 1, Darth Maul, extends the lightsaber, and then he extends the other side. It's a 2-bladed lightsaber. Episode 2, it's got a curvy handle.
Yeah.
We're definitely running out of things to do with lightsabers by the third one.
Real quick before we move on, one thing I love about these movies though is the sound mixing.
Yes.
I a lot of times in my theater at home, I'm like, the dialogue's not quite loud enough, or if I turn it up, then the action scenes are too loud. And these prequels just felt perfect. They just felt like everything was really satisfyingly mixed. And maybe my favorite moment of sound mixing in Star Wars is the seismic charges in episode 2.
Yes.
Where they just suddenly there is complete silence. Like I literally thought the speakers broke in the theater. Like I thought something got pulled. There's just complete silence and it's wow. Like there's something about that even no matter how many times I watch that movie, it just still gets me. And I'm like, that's pretty cool.
It's very satisfying.
Yeah.
I mean, the sound mix and the visual effects in all of these are stellar. Like for what they were at the time, you know, they were cutting edge technology. A lot of it still holds up now. Some of it really does not. The sound mixing and sound design, I think, really, really do.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's weird, especially in all three movies, but there's moments where it really doesn't hold up for me, and there's other moments where it really does. Like the battle droids in episode 1.
The visual effects, you mean?
The visual effects, sorry.
Yeah.
The battle droids in episode 1 still look really good, actually, and they kind of the lighting on them and the way they kind of have a griminess to them. Really, I really buy it. But then it's what I was talking about with the sets. Like I want them to be on real sets. Like just build
The
a set,
sets,
George
yeah.
Lucas, because that's where I really feel it. Is where everything is CG, every wall, every floor, window is CG, and then it doesn't feel right. Something's wrong. You know, you can't replicate the vibe of an actual set.
Yeah.
It was funny watching these with my digital artist girlfriend who loves Star Wars and had a fun time rewatching all the movies with me. But just during the prequels, just every 5 minutes, you just hear.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, some of the visual effects really don't hold up, and you can really see the compositing, like you're saying, Alex. Like just the environments don't look real at all.
Like you have all the money, just build a set. Like commit to the look of the set.
But I think, and this is another thing that the prequels have given us that is positive overall, I think, is it did push the technology forward.
Yes.
Like
Sure.
the things they were doing
Yeah.
had never been done before.
Shooting digitally.
Right, shooting
was a big deal
digitally.
at
It was
the
the
time.
first thing to do, like big movie to do that. The idea of a CG character, Jar Jar, had never been done before. And
Right,
like,
right.
Then we got Gollum a few years later. So like there was technological, advancement happening, and it itself didn't hold up, but I think it provided a lot of tools that were then useful.
Of course. I mean, and no one is going to deny the legacy of these films. Like they made their money. I mean, truthfully, like we can, pan them now and hate them now as much as we want to. And they were not exactly welcomed with unequivocal positivity at the time. But they made their money. They cemented the franchise as this franchise with potential to keep going. Like they economically viable this franchise is.
If nothing else.
People did pay to see them in a theater.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. We'll go pay to see our Star Wars all day.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in the next one, I think. So going into Revenge of the Sith. So for me, there was literally a single shot that I had in my head. This was how I had managed my expectations. Where going into 3, I was like, there's just one shot I want, and if it's in the movie, I'll be happy. And magically it was in the movie, it blew me away. But it's at the very end where it's kind of doing that montage wrapping up. This is how everything connected to episode 4.
I know the one you're about to say.
It's on the Star Destroyer, and it's like a super wide shot, and it's exactly like it looked in A New Hope, and Darth Vader's walking onto the bridge, and it's just composed perfect. You can see the Death Star a little bit outside, and it just looked super Star Warsy. And I was like, okay, cool. At that point in my life, that's all I wanted, and it gave it to me, and that made me happy.
Yeah.
Rewatching it now, this was definitely the hardest one to get through for me.
I watched it today.
Yeah.
I felt
I also watched it
I
today.
feel like my essence, my energy, the essence of my being was depressed by it. I don't
Like-
know. I just really did not enjoy watching it.
Like Dark Crystal, somewhere there's a vial of you that
Yeah.
someone can drink to.
It drained me. Like I don't know. I feel like a Star Wars movie, even if it's not great, should at least get me a little jazzed or kind of, I don't know, make me feel kind of happy. But so much of that movie just sucked me dry of joy.
Well,
I don't
it's
know.
super dark. So it's not
Yeah.
supposed to be fun in that sense. Like, and not that I'm not
Yeah.
defending it.
Sure.
I'm just saying it is the first of the Star Wars movies to be rated PG-13.
Mm.
All of the
Mhm.
others were rated PG. Now, in the original trilogy, when it was made, there was no such thing as PG-13. And I'd be interested to know, like, I'm sure there's still rated PG now, but there's some stuff in it that's scary and, you know, kind of dark. But they rated Revenge of the Sith PG-13 because it is dark throughout. Listen, a lot of kids get murdered
Yeah.
Right.
in this movie, and there is not one like happy thing at the end of it. Basically, like Luke and Leia make it out okay, but we all know we all know where that's going. But it is. Lucas set out to make this classical tragedy. It's like the first 3 movies could be called the tragedy of Darth Vader, right? In a Shakespearean sense. And so it makes absolute sense that you would feel bad
Right.
during most of that film.
But I think, unfortunately, I think the soul deadness I felt was like in the craft more than the content.
Of course, yeah.
And I think it just starts at the very beginning with the opening sequence where
It's really bad.
It's trying really hard to like. I feel like he had some feedback about, you know, there needs to be some more fun and characterization and life in these people, and he tries, and it just falls even flatter than when they were stoic. Like like episode 3 opening sequence makes me want to go back to like Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan being super stoic, because there's so much like attempts at banter that are so painful, and it's such a bad foot to start this movie off with. It's just
And it's so weird because, again, I remember my experience watching it the first time being like, oh, they did it this time. Like, this opening sequence is actually kind of like cool. Like, it starts with a long take and it's CG, so that's cheating. But, you know, he's doing interesting things with it. But watching it again today, I feel exactly the same. Like, nothing that
it feels cheap in a really sad way to me.
And I think, like you were saying, Trisha, the darkness of it, I think I gravitated to when it came out, and I was like, okay, they're finally getting into it, and like stuff is happening, and that was enough for me to feel like it was good, but it's not.
No. You can't just tell a sad story and then expect that to have the gravitas that you wish for it to have, especially when you open it like this one opens. I was really angry watching that opening sequence this afternoon.
It's a really upsetting opening sequence because there's other parts of the movie that aren't that bad.
No,
but to start your movie this way, it just feels really cheap. I don't know.
Anakin and Obi-Wan are like in a life and death situation throughout the opening sequence. They're in this dogfight and they're trying to rescue the Emperor. Or he's not the Emperor yet. I'm sorry,
Supreme
Palpatine.
Chancellor.
Supreme Chancellors. Titles matter. But they're trying to rescue him. It's very dire, but they're joking around. And then,
Constantly.
then when they get in there, Anakin just beheads Count Dooku.
Do it.
Like, yeah, he straight up murders him in the first couple minutes, and they go straight from that back into banter. You saved my life 9 times. Actually, this is 10 times. What? It doesn't work. You rob everything out from under that scene when you try to like give them this like, again, they're trying to make up for a lack of character work that should have been done earlier. They're
Right.
trying to create more of this jovial brotherly relationship so that then the turn at the end will have some weight to it. But it doesn't work that way. We've been with these characters already for 2 movies. If you want us to care about them, you should have started earlier. Lesson 11, ding.
I think I remember walking out of the theater and my friend we're just walking out of the theater. My friend goes, well, George Lucas can stop now. Like, that's how just deflated we
Wow.
were.
Yeah.
And I think that my expectations were so low this time that I was just like, this movie's fun. I actually enjoyed it just because I felt like it was moving more and it had sort of more action-y kind of sequences and stuff. And it's like, yeah, you're following this very dark story, obviously. But I also just felt like because I didn't care that I wasn't going to think it was a great movie. I just enjoyed looking at it, basically.
Mhm.
Which is
images flashing in front of your
Yeah,
eyes
exactly.
and sounds entering your...
I just turned into a toddler.
Yeah.
Well, and once again, like you said, Michael, everything is good on paper. Like the idea that there's this forbidden love with Anakin and Padme. They have a love child that's on the way that nobody knows about.
Somehow,
Yeah.
even though she's like super pregnant, no one's ever like,
Right.
hey,
Where-
so
And they're Jedi.
are you
like,
seeing
what,
anybody?
what can they know and what can they not know?
Yeah. They
It's a
just
very
assume
confusing.
she's been eating a lot of pears.
At one point, she goes, "Oh yeah, Obi-Wan was just here."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Did he not have any questions for you?"
We're like, yeah, are you seeing someone?
yeah. What?
Yeah.
Obi-Wan's the father.
Oh my god.
Ah.
But yeah, it's actually on paper it's a good dilemma. It's like Jedis aren't supposed to have attachments. She's going to die in childbirth. We can talk about that later, about how she actually dies. I like that as a intractable conflict for a character of, I'm not supposed to have attachments. I have somebody I love. They're gonna die, but I need to let go of my attachments. How can I do that? All that's great in theory, but man, I was so sad watching this movie at just how like depressed Natalie Portman must have felt for her role in episode 3, because
Right.
she's a strong character in 1 and parts of 2.
Right.
Like
I was thinking about what you said about Princess Leia,
Yes.
Trisha, and the
It was
original
like-
trilogy. It's the
it was
same
all
thing
over
that
again.
happened.
But she was like, it was literally, I'm gonna sit in this apartment and literally like make a baby, and that's my only role in this movie, is to sit here and like be sad and make a baby.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, when they put her in at the very last scene where they finally let her wear pants. And they like let her, she like goes and takes this ship, and they're like, "Oh no, you shouldn't go." And she's like, "I'm going." Like, and she's, she's like sort of dressed all action-y, even though she's like action pregnant lady. I'm like, cool. And she's like, "No, I've got C-3PO. I'm good. I'm gonna go handle this." I'm like, they're giving her some agency finally, but at that point, it's been so undercut by how little she has to do in the rest of this movie, and how dependent they make her on Anakin. Like
Right.
It's like if she's like, "I'm not gonna die in childbirth, I promise." I'm like, really? What are you doing about it, Padme?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, their dialogue in 3 is even more the
boy.
room than episode 2 in some ways.
I
Like,
I
it's
love-
amazing.
I think one of you guys maybe liked it on Twitter, maybe you, Trisha, but somebody was like, the whole like, "Oh, so love has blinded you?" No, but maybe it has. But yes, someone posted on Twitter and they just said, "Is this dialogue?
Is this dialogue?
What is this dialogue? Is this dialogue?"
Oh,
I don't know that it can be called that.
I said the word "no" out loud in my apartment today when that scene happened. I was like, "No,
No.
oh God. Well, just really quickly, to kind of wrap up the Padme storyline, like, what is with her death? She's dying. She's lost the will to live, but then she gives birth to her babies, and she seems like happy to see them, and she even has like names ready for them. Like, she knows what she's gonna name her babies, and then she like, I guess, decides to die because
Dunzo.
there's no medical reason for her to die, according to the robot.
Right.
She's medically perfect. She's just lost the will to live. So we're supposed to accept that, like, Anakin turning dark side, she's gonna like self-terminate herself, even though she just gave birth to babies.
It's very Romeo and Juliet. I'm not defending the choice. I'm saying it's like purposefully being
like,
framed that way.
What if he actually, like, by choking her, like, kills her? Like you could have killed her in a way that's really tragic and amazing.
But
Right.
not in a kids movie.
Yeah, you could have.
He murdered 30
Well,
kids.
no, but not.
He's definitely
but like,
an abusive boyfriend.
well, she'd have to have the babies first.
Well, of course.
I
No,
guess.
that's what
Okay.
I'm saying.
All right. I guess
like,
you.
if she was like mortally wounded by Anakin, but able to deliver the babies
Right.
and then
Okay.
died,
Yeah.
then that's a really tragic, amazing story.
Mhm.
But when the robot says, he literally says, there's nothing medically wrong with her at all. She's simply lost the will to live.
Right.
It's like, yeah. I mean, it's exactly the thing. It's like if you had gone to the trouble to give her a little more screen time, set up her story, character development a little bit more.
Right.
How does she feel about becoming a mother? How does she
Right.
feel about, potentially having, she has to hide their romance. She doesn't like that. That's mentioned one time where she's like, "I want to tell somebody." Nope. Okay. But yeah, I absolutely agree. You could have easily been like, "No, I have to live for my children." And then
Right.
but she's too wounded. Yeah. Yikes.
Right. I just,
Yeah.
because once again, on paper, it's a really great tragic ending to a story but it's done in this weird way. Why'd you do it this way?
Right. Well, because, Trisha, you said Romeo and Juliet, and I think for me it rings more like Greek tragedy, where you have Sophocles in Oedipus, as I think we talked about before on the podcast, of maybe on The Matrix, where because you heard the prophecy, it makes you change what you're doing with your life. And so the question is, if Anakin wasn't having these dreams, would he have then set forth a course of action that led him to do all these things? Did Palpatine give him those dreams? I watched it.
Right.
It's the first time I'd watched episode 3, having seen Last Jedi, where I'm like, oh, who knows if maybe the head bad guy was like, I'm going to make you think this thing's going to happen so that you will then follow through with these actions. So, it's the scene in The Matrix where the Oracle says, oh, if I hadn't said, don't worry about the vase, would you have turned around and would you have broken it? And I think that's a cool, again, on paper, that's a cool choice to say, this is as John York says, a darkened version, like Breaking Bad or Godfather, where you do things for a sympathetic reason, but your flaw makes you do them evilly, So you set forth this course of action that ends up being tragic, but you're doing it because you believe it's the only option you have.
Yeah. And to George Lucas's credit, the reasons that Anakin was originally going to ultimately turn to the dark side, I read this somewhere, were a little bit more political, and they were a little bit hazier kind of thing, where it's like, well, I believe in the Emperor because I, want to defeat the wars or whatever. Like the whole sort of stated reasons that the Jedi allow the Chancellor to then become the Emperor and remain in power, all of this stuff that happens. A lot of that, I think, was mixed more into Anakin's story originally, and George Lucas zeroed in on, actually, it's this personal reason, right? Because it has to do with this love that he feels that he can't escape, which he's allowed himself to fall in love. The reason the Jedi aren't supposed to have attachments is because they are supposed to be selfless.
See what happens?
Yeah. Who are you talking to?
But I would argue
the Jedi talking to the Anakin.
But I think it was a smart call on paper to make Anakin's turn about that, because that is understandable as a motivation. It's probably about the only understandable one in this whole thing.
I would argue that compassion is what a Jedi does. So they are encouraged to love. Have a pair. The Jedi's philosophy is weird in the first place. So
Sure.
It's not hard for him to be like, eh. Although when you talk about the no subtext to a scene, one line that I can't shake is when they're on rocks floating down a lava river. And he says, from my point of view, the Jedi are evil. And I think it's interesting because on a non-subtextual, or I guess on a non-textual level, I'm like, it's interesting. You can see how he has followed this thread to have this other viewpoint of who the Jedi are. But when you actually have your character say
it.
From my viewpoint, that shows that he recognizes that they have opposing viewpoints.
It's like a weird self-awareness.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's like,
and it's like, if you're going to take
thesis is
right, if you're going to take your character to the darkest things imaginable, like, you can't have him accept that there are multiple viewpoints. It's the Jedi are evil, not, well, if you look at it from my point of view, I made this chart.
PowerPoint.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, literally, I think every line in this movie reads like a note to the writer of I need to find dialogue that conveys this.
Right.
And it's just that.
This is the
just
stand-in line until we figure out the actual dialogue.
Right.
Yeah, as producers say, it's not this line, it's not this one, but it's something like this,
Yeah.
right?
Here's the bad version.
Yes, exactly.
I just love when he's talking to Padme on the lava planet, and he literally says, only my new powers can do that.
Yeah.
Only my new powers can save you.
In response
Love
to
can't
the
save you.
childbirth stuff.
Or only a Sith deals in absolutes, which is itself an absolute.
Somebody proofread.
It's like, I feel like that whole finale, again, the first time it had kind of the weight that it was going for, of this, it's all coming down to this. And this time it was like, this is going to be a curtain call of every bad thing that's happened in the prequels. We're going to bring it all out, and it's just the worst dialogue. It's just so bad.
Now they're surfing on robots in the lava.
It goes on for too long.
It starts off okay.
Right.
I'm down with...
It's pretty cool.
Their
at
fights
first.
really fast at first, and it's kind of really intense choreography.
It's blue on blue, which is like
Yeah.
It's
It's
never
cool.
happened before.
but then it just keeps,
Battle of the Heroes, great piece of music.
Yeah.
It just
And then they
keeps
jump on
going.
the pipe. And at first I was like, all right, they're going to do Jedi stuff on the pipe. They're mostly just trying to balance that whole time. Like, it's
Right.
not entertaining to watch them
It
balance on this
really
pipe.
slows down at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And did you notice 13 dwarves come by in barrels when they're on the lava?
I don't hate the decision of a lava planet in general.
Sure.
I hate
Yeah.
the exact manifestation of the way this goes down.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I will say the thing that is still fun for me, and that when I watched it today, I remembered sitting in the theater, and especially sitting next to my mom, because every time a Star Wars movie comes out, I go and see it with my parents, and like they would remember, and especially my mom gets so into all the like action sequences, and she, you know, the Death Star trench run, she's always so excited and giddy, and I remember sitting next to her when the Darth Vader mask gets put on for the first time, and I feel like that there is like 10 seconds there where it's
a
like
beautiful moment before you know what comes after it.
right, and like it just slides on, and the sound, and he takes the first breath, and it's like, okay, yes, like this moment
It's cool.
is good.
Cut away. Cut away.
Get out while you still
Yeah,
can.
this is where the scene should cut.
Yeah.
You hear his breath, done.
Right.
Done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in the theater, grabbing the person next to me and going, "Oh no. Oh no." As he starts walking out right before he says no. I was like, "Oh God, don't do it. Don't no.
Well,
Ah!"
honestly, that's when I first saw this movie in theaters. That's where this movie destroyed me, because the
broke
whole
my feelings.
prequel trilogy is building up to this scene.
Right.
Yep.
It's all about this scene where Anakin becomes Darth Vader. Everything has been for this. And it's really cool when the mask goes on, you hear the first breath, and then
And it stabs you in the
dialogue,
heart.
The dialogue, the performance, everything is wrong after that point. In the worst, like, how could you,
How?
like you had to try to do it this bad. Like, how did you do it this bad? I just don't know. I don't know. When Frankenstein like breaks free of his restraints,
Yeah.
it's just. Ugh.
Here's the thing, though. Some of the other corny moments in the finale of Revenge of the Sith, though, wouldn't bug us. I think they wouldn't bug us as much if that one wasn't so bad. So, like, the scene where they give Luke to his aunt and uncle, and they go stand up on the rise,
fine.
and you see the sunset.
Yeah, they're
It's
looking at the blue
corny.
screen.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
It's corny, but it wouldn't bother you that much if it hadn't been placed next to 3 other very corny, annoying, on the nose scenes.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, it doesn't even bother me that much at all. It just, I can forgive a lot of things, but the Darth Vader scene, the scene where he becomes Darth Vader, like, you can't screw that one up. Like, that's of all scenes.
Oh, but you can.
Ugh.
And then Joel Edgerton, when he takes Luke, he just saes, "Well, I hope taking this baby doesn't burn us someday." Credits.
I'm going to kick you under the table.
Aunt Beru doesn't have a single line.
No, she doesn't.
In this whole,
No,
like,
no.
she shows up, she just stands there, and she's like, I'm gonna be someone later. I'm not anyone right now. What was fun, an interesting thought experiment that one could have before, now it's more complicated, but to kind of wrap up the experience of watching the prequels, was for someone who hadn't seen Star Wars, in what order do you show them Star Wars was a question, and that was a popular debate I would have with people.
I finally found my order. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. The one I arrived at for Revenge of the Sith was my roommate, Steven, had never seen any of the Star Wars movies at all when he came to live with me. And so I was like, well, we have to watch the original. So we did 4, and then we did 5. And then I realized that 3 was coming out soon. And I was like, actually, let's wait. So we did 4, 5. Let's go back to 1 and 2. And then we'll see 3 in theaters and then do 6. And that was actually
Interesting.
a very, like, the emotional ride of that was cool for him. And, like, you know, he didn't know that Luke and Leia were twins, so that was like a big moment in 3. And
Oh,
so
like a twist.
Cool.
it added like weight and momentum to 3. So then it was like, well, now I gotta go do Return of the Jedi. So for a long time, that was the order that I recommended to people.
That's
But what's
funny.
your order, Brian?
Well, yeah. So I mean, I think the best order is to not watch all of them.
Yeah.
There's like the famous. I think it was Topher Grace made a 90-minute cut of the prequels.
Yeah.
Did he ever release that?
No,
I want
but
access to that.
but the story is that it opens with Duel of the Fates. And then Qui-Gon's like, "Hey, train the boy," and Obi-Wan says, "Gotcha." And it's like, "Yep, that's pretty much all you need from episode 1."
Right.
But I was like, I want to watch them all. And before Force Awakens came out, my friend and I watched on May the 3rd and May the 4th, we watched 1 through 3, and then we watched 4 through 6. And it was so weird to watch in that order because, like, the most badass, like, wise Jedi in the galaxy is then, like, fighting over a droid for a candy bar and just, like, is this doddering old fool. All the shocking things of the original trilogy are just delivered in like dialogue, just like, oh, Luke and Leia, here they are. And I thought that doesn't work. So I said, I want to watch the original trilogy first. Like, let's watch the original movies first, period. I don't want to watch anything before them. And then after 6, I was thinking, well, I don't want to watch the prequels now. I want to go forward to 7. So then I was like, okay, 4, 5, 6, then 7 and 8. And then I assume in the future I will want to then continue to 9. And then say, I'm done. I'm done watching Star Wars. Now I'm going to go back and watch the 1, 2, and 3. Like, as sort of like, now I'm going to watch this other separate, not really connected thing. And then you watch 1, 2, and 3. Then you watch Solo because it's like also kind of cartoony and fun like the prequels. And Darth Maul's in it, so it connects to him a little bit. Then you watch Rogue One, which then sets you up to start all over again next time you watch it. But I just thought, like, yeah, I enjoyed watching the prequels so much more when I had already watched 4 through 8 and was just like, I'm done with my sort of like Star Wars experience. Now I can just turn my brain off and watch these prequels. And it was so much more fun when that was like past the needing them to be anything kind of mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that's why, see, that makes me so sad. And that's why Disney, if you're listening, this is a impassioned plea. Let me remake the prequels. I think, like, who's going to be upset if you remake the prequels? It can't get worse. The worst thing that'll happen is you'll make more money. But, like, you could remake the prequels and make them amazing. Like, I feel like we've learned so many lessons from the prequels and from the new trilogy and all these things that, like, we could keep the same toys. We don't have to, like, change that much. But I think you could take the story and remake them to live up to what they're supposed to be.
You actually would want the challenge of taking the, like, Anakin Skywalker downfall story and making, like, the best version of it.
I feel like, yes. I think it'd be the hardest thing I'd ever do in my life, but I'm super down for it.
Disney, you should let him.
We are going to talk about the new movie, so I don't want to say too much about it yet, but this is one of the reasons I really, really respect The Force Awakens, because you are essentially climbing into the cockpit of a crashed Millennium Falcon and trying to fly it out of a graveyard.
Right.
It's like, I really respect it. That's a hard job. It is the hardest cockpit in the world to sit in, and we have some top-notch filmmakers that have stepped up and done that for us. And with, not perfect results, but I'm, like you said, the worst thing that happens is Disney makes more money and we all get more Star Wars.
Right.
So.
Win-win.
Win-win.
So what did we learn from the prequels?
Good question.
Yes.
Besides all the lessons we've already listed.
We listed some golden lessons
Yeah,
here.
I feel like it's just like take your pick. I mean, I think for me, I think the subtext thing really hit home is like, sometimes you need examples of what not to do, like very clear examples of what does it look like when you're doing this wrong. And all the prequels, and I think increasingly as they go on, are great examples of bad subtext, lack thereof of subtext, and what it looks like when you need to do another draft of your scene or rethink some things. So I think that's my big takeaways. And I think it was nice revisiting it as an adult that knows more about filmmaking to be able to identify that and be like, the things that you're trying to get across are interesting, but the way you're doing it is in the least interesting possible way. So I think that's
the first thought way.
Right.
Is that I have an idea for a story or for a scene or for whatever. Here's the first thought.
Right.
And that's what you see
right.
on screen.
Right. So sometimes you need it just a slap across the face. And that's
and 8 more ideas. No.
Yeah. What about you, Alex?
I think it's in the same vein, but just kind of like, it's okay to get help. So as a writer, like,
Hold on.
Hang on, Michael's struggling.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Speaking of movies that feel very cartoony, Michael literally just did a spit take.
With whiskey.
Literally just did a spit take.
Sorry, I'm here. Go on.
because George Lucas, he's credited as, story by George Lucas in all the original trilogy, but Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, it wasn't him doing all the writing. And I think that shows. And I think it's great to acknowledge what your strengths are, what your limitations are. And I'm trying to do that for myself as a writer. What are my strengths? Where do I need help? Where do I need to bring in other voices, other brains to help me get out of my bubble? And I think these prequels are a really interesting example of what happens when you don't do that, when you just stay within your strengths, which are maybe this kind of big picture storyline, these big ideas, but not the nitty gritty character motivations, dialogue. You may not be great at those. And if you don't want to get great at those, then bring in other writers to help you. There's a lot of great writers who could have helped these movies.
Truly.
So I think that if somebody like George Lucas wants to make more Star Wars movies, having a self-awareness of what your strengths and weaknesses are and being okay to bring in help to help you with those is my lesson from these movies.
Well, it's something I think we've talked about before also, of like, if you become too successful maybe too quickly, there's no one to say no to you. And I think having people to say no and give you feedback, I always think about the line from The West Wing where President Bartlett says he likes smart people that disagree with him. And I think that's an important thing to have when you're trying to make something.
Yeah. Feedback is good.
I disagree.
And that's why you're here. Trisha.
My thing goes back to character motivations. I think that what you're talking about with subtext, Michael, is important and is easiest to achieve when you as the writer have a really clear understanding of what your character's motivations are in every scene. So if you have two characters who each want something in a scene and the audience understands what that is, like, okay, we have these two people in a scene. We have Obi-Wan who needs information and we have this other character who doesn't want to give him any, right? So if we clearly understand what that is, then all of the other tactics that the characters take, it gives room for that subtext where it's like, Obi-Wan is trying to get this information. He's going to try intimidation. He's going to try bribery. He's going to try flattery. He's going to try whatever it is. This is obviously a hypothetical scene because none of the scenes in the prequels are remotely crafted in any way. But I'm saying that subtext becomes possible when there are clear motivations established within the characters and the audience understands what those are. Then when they're talking around an issue, we still understand the real issue they're talking about because it has to do with their goals. And these movies could use a little bit more of that, is all I'm saying. It's too convoluted and the character work hasn't been done. There aren't personal stakes. It becomes this like weird political game minefield. And then the stakes that are there are just surface. They're stated stakes and goals. They're not created by the plot and the situations and the actual characters themselves. So anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to underscore, that in order for there to be subtext, the audience needs to already know what's going on. Like there's other story work.
There needs to be text.
Right. Yeah. Because otherwise you're just not saying anything and that doesn't make sense either. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you're trying to let the dialogue do the lifting that the story should have done.
Right.
Right.
Brian.
I'm actually going to share a positive lesson from the prequel trilogy. We'll talk about this next time, but my problem with Force Awakens was, I think, everyone else's problem, which was it felt too familiar. And I remember thinking, well, at least the prequels were trying to be something else. And I never thought I would bring up the prequels as like a defense of Star Wars. But it did occur to me rewatching this that like episode 1, even though it doesn't really do a great job, is trying to be this political kind of intrigue. It sets up Palpatine, who's working both sides, blah, blah, blah. Because you think, what's episode 1 about? Oh, it's about Darth Maul. He's on screen for 5.5 minutes. Like
the best 5.5 minutes of the movie.
I agree. But he is not what episode 1 is about. Then episode 2 is this caper of like solving this mystery and blah, blah, blah. And episode 3 is this kind of Greek tragedy. So I think that, like we talked about with Aliens and Terminator 2, sort of the same premise, but with a different designing principle, it feels like the prequel trilogy is telling one story, even if episode 1 doesn't do much to tell the Anakin. Just like, here's a kid who pod raced and then got on a ship. But like, it's 3 movies telling one story, but each movie is its own thing, and it kind of takes a different approach to telling its own story, which is part of this greater story. And again, that's way better on paper than it is as executed. But I think that's the thing I probably appreciate the most about the prequels.
Ding.
Ding.
I'm with you there, Brian. That's what I want more from new Star Wars movies is, take this world, take this premise, but give us a different designing principle and really commit to it and give us a good movie that is genuinely different in its structure and in its beats than previous Star Wars movies.
But then it's a balance, because last time we said don't stray too far from the thing. Like, we didn't bring up the diner scene in episode 2, which is the first time that
that's a weird straying. That's I don't know if that's straying, because I think you can stray in the sense of like what type of story you're telling.
Yeah.
But breaking the universe is different to me. Like this is an earthbound thing, like a 50s diner from Earth is on Coruscant,
and that
doesn't feel right.
Bothers me. Yeah.
You want a cup of Joe?
Yeah. No, a Jawa juice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I do love Dex though. He's very cute.
It's fun.
Obi-Wan.
Well, and there are even things in, if you watch the deleted scenes of A New Hope, there are things that feel like they would be universe breaking if they were in the actual.
Really?
Yeah.
Like when Luke is hanging out with his friends, it's like, oh, it's like a 70s like hangout like spot. It feels like it's out of that other movie that he did.
American Graffiti.
Wow. Yep. That one. Great. Why don't we quickly go around and say what we've been watching recently? Trisha.
I saw The Irishman, as all of you can. It's on your Netflix. It is, as I'm sure you've heard, Martin Scorsese's new movie. It is very long. It has Al Pacino and Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci, and they are old. And
Not the whole movie, though.
Not the whole movie, though. And you know what? It's pretty damn good. It is really long, and yet somehow it doesn't feel boring. Like, you're kind of at the edge of your seat wanting to know what's going to happen next. It's this like, it's a really interesting, if you've seen a lot of Scorsese films, it's an interesting departure, because it's definitely a gangster movie, but it's a gangster movie in a way that feels, relatable. Like, they managed to make De Niro really likable and interesting, and he certainly does a lot of bad stuff in the movie. Anyway, it's just, and I was really worried about the technology, because they do a lot of de-aging of those 3 mature actors, and you know what? They look pretty good. Like, it does get a little distracting here and there, especially when you first see it. You're like, oh, wow, that's distracting. And sometimes the physicality, like you've de-aged their faces, but you haven't de-aged their physicality.
When De Niro's beating up the guy at the corner store.
That's exactly the scene I was thinking of.
This is an old man's body with a young man's face.
It's like, maybe a stunt double for the scene. Just put De Niro's face on it. But honestly, most of the time, it truly does work. And it's pretty good. Like, I'm expecting to see some Oscar nods and maybe even some wins for this film. So,
I mean, the fact that it took till 2019 for Scorsese and Pacino to make a movie together,
seriously,
and De Niro and Pesci are also in it. Like, I want it to be 3.5 hours long.
Oh yeah,
wow.
I mean, and they're fantastic. They're all fantastic at every moment.
Really? Yeah.
Pesci's actually
Pacino.
like, I'm expecting a Best Supporting Actor nod for Pesci, and he might win it.
Yeah,
like, he's excellent.
I mean, he should have gotten it for the Michael Jackson Moonwalker movie. So
we all agree about that.
Yeah. Brian, what have you been watching?
So you recommended Fleabag, the TV show, Phoebe Waller-Bridge's TV show. Alt Shift X also recommended Fleabag. I'm not going to recommend Fleabag, the TV show. I'm going to recommend Fleabag, Phoebe Waller-Bridge's one-woman show.
The show.
The play, which she originally did for the Edinburgh Fringe and won awards, and that's how it turned into a series. Then she remounted it a couple months ago on the West End in London. And one of my favorite things to do is to go to National Theatre Live, which is the National Theatre in London. They screen performances of their shows around the world. So you can go to your local movie theater, and it's a certain day at a certain time. So it's like such and such day at 7 p.m. That's the day you can go and watch this show. And sometimes they'll even do it live, where you go at like 1 p.m. on a Tuesday and you can watch their actual screening that night. So I went and saw Frankenstein, which was directed by Danny Boyle and had Johnny Lee Miller and Benedict Cumberbatch, the two of the three Sherlocks as Frankenstein and the creature, and they swapped roles every night, so you could actually go see one casting and then go see the other casting.
That's really fun.
It's awesome. I saw Benedict Cumberbatch's Hamlet. I saw Kenneth Branagh's Macbeth, Ian McKellen's King Lear, and most recently, Phoebe Waller-Bridge's Fleabag. And it's just her sitting in a chair for an hour and a half, basically telling you the story of the first season of the show, with a couple things from the second season. And it's a powerhouse performance, and she's incredible. And my broad recommendation is go see National Theater live, because it's always great. Andrew Scott, the sexy priest from second season of Fleabag, is also in the show right now that you can go see. But it was just awesome to sit in a theater full of people and watch on a screen a woman on a stage sitting in a chair for an hour and a half and being completely riveted and like in tears at the end. And she's just phenomenal.
So I was sitting here, I was like, I got one this time that no one else will have. I saw Fleabag live.
No.
And then Brian
If I had thought there was any chance anyone else had seen that. That's
yeah.
why you were glaring at me.
Yeah. But it was amazing. So I saw
Anakin Lee.
I will echo everything that Brian said. It was really amazing. It was the first time that I'd been to one of these like theater on screen things. And I did have some trouble getting over, like, I feel like theater just doesn't translate to film. But despite all that, it was riveting, and it was really amazing seeing it in this one woman show form, and kind of thinking about the process she must have gone through to adapt it to a TV show, and kind of reverse engineering that was really interesting. And then imagining sitting in a theater with her doing that, I feel like would have amplified it even 1,000 times more for me. But yeah, it was really amazing. So
it's a weird one to see for your first National Theater live. Like Frankenstein by Danny Boyle, like the cameras were all over the place and there was close-ups, and it felt like you were watching not a movie, but still like a nice stage production. Whereas a woman sitting in a chair, it's like there's two angles,
right.
you know? Yeah.
Medium and far.
Yeah.
Cool. What about you, Alex?
Well, I've been binging The Crown season 3 on Netflix.
So good.
Yeah. New
so
cast,
good.
new
Olivia
cast, new
Colman.
era. Olivia Colman is great because she's always great. And I love this new season. I think it's great. I've really enjoyed The Crown through seasons 1 and 2. I loved Claire Foy and the whole cast previously. And I used to, Michael, I was like not a fan of the King's Speech. And I was like, why is this movie winning all the awards? I'm just so over these like royalty movies. I don't care about their stories. But The Crown has won me over. The royal family is really fascinating, and there's so many interesting familial stories to tell here. And I think this season especially, my favorite episodes so far have been involving Prince Charles and Princess Margaret, the Queen's sister, and just exploring what is it like to be a part of this weird situation where there's all these strange expectations on you. You're part of this symbolic thing, but you're also just trying to be a person and live your life. I think it's amazing how the show both has great character studies and also is almost an education on British history. Yeah. I've learned so much about 20th century British history that I never would have known before. So really recommend it. And also just exquisite production value. So
gorgeous.
It's like stupidly pretty and well shot and great music and just really, just British. Yeah.
I have a question for you, which I'll ask on mic because other people might have the same question.
Yes.
I have not seen any of The Crown, and I want to eventually, but I love Olivia Colman so much. Can I just jump straight to season 3 and catch up on the first 2 later?
I think you probably can. I don't know if all the characters are really introduced in a way in season 3 for like a new audience. Like there might be characters that you just kind of jump in on and the show expects you to have spent some time with them. Right. Even though they're a new cast. So
you can, but I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I think, season 1 expects that you don't know these characters. Right. And season 3 expects that you do.
Cool.
So
awesome. Cool. Okay. Well, we just talked about the prequels. There was a lot of things to say. We said a lot of things. There's a lot left unsaid.
I'm glad we got the diner in there.
Yeah.
Because that was unsaid. And that was also a brain breaking moment for me.
Sure.
When I first saw that movie.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening. So this is episode 2 of 3 that we are doing on Star Wars. So we did the original trilogy, we just did the prequels, and we'll be back soon doing the new trilogy leading up to the release of The Rise of Skywalker. Thank you for listening. Thank you to everyone that supports the show on Patreon. If you want to support the show, head to Patreon. Yeah, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.